Nothing compares to the people who lost their lives and people who lost loved ones.
Never did anyone think that you would be in a situation where 99% of your communication systems would become fractured.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kristen Farley.
And I'm Don Dare. Thank you for joining us.
Over the next half hour, everyone, we'd like to invite you to a special roundtable discussion, WATE 6 on your side, the Sevier County wildfires, lessons learned 1 year later. You know, we are here once again at the Anna Porter Library, and this really became the epicenter, if you will, following the fires.
Right, and the sports complex is right outside of the library, and that's where hundreds of people were gathered right after the wildfires. And inside the library, this is where all of the news conferences were centered, and it seems like we were here just yesterday.
It does, and so many lives forever changed by what happened on November 28th. And so many people stepping forward to provide information and resources in the hours, days, weeks, months to follow.
Yep.
We've invited the men and women who essentially kind of became the faces of those wildfires back here to the library once again for this discussion today.
That's right, and joining us today we have Great Smoky Mountains Park Superintendent Cassius Cash, as well as the mayor from Sevier County, Mayor Larry Waters.
And from the city of Gatlinburg, we have Mayor Mike Warner, we have City Manager Cindy Ogle, and we have Fire Chief Greg Miller. Thank you all for joining us today. Chief Miller, let's start with you. Undoubtedly, in a disaster like this, there are so many questions that people have, and the one we hear over and over again has to do with evacuations on that day. And so many people ask, why were widespread evacuations not issued earlier in the area, especially since the fire in the park had been burning since the Wednesday before Thanksgiving?
Well, we first got true communication between the park and the Gatlinburg Fire Department the morning of the 28th, around 11 a.m. And what made it different is the winds, as the winds began to come through. And our information pointed to the fact that if the fire were to make it to the city limits, it would be in the area of Minot Park. So that was where the threat was coming towards. So therefore, that's why we assembled all the fire resources in and around that area to protect the area of Minot Park, Savage Gardens, Davenport, because that's where the threat's coming towards.
With so many spot fires already reported in the park, and then some were even popping up in the city of Gatlinburg, why weren't other areas covered, or at what point did you decide to extend the evacuations?
Every time we were notified of fire in another area, then the first thing that the fire and law enforcement and even members from the trolley department, the mass transit group, they were going door to door once we were aware. So you didn't know where the fire was going to go until it went there. It's not like it was following a specific path or a set of rules or orders. There was no coordination to where the fire popped up at.
Was there any discussion at that time during the voluntary evacuations of the possibility of further evacuations of the city?
It was a very dynamic situation. It was ever changing. We were just taking things as they came and beginning to expand the evacuations as needed. No one ever came up with a suggestion that says, let's go ahead and do it now. Let's evacuate everybody now. Once that decision was made, and it was fully supported by everybody. So there was no discussion prior to the point that the evacuations was made.
Real quickly, we have spoken before, and correct me if I'm wrong, actually where you were stationed, the command center, where all of the resources were coming together to try to get crews to the right places. At some point in the evening, you were threatened by fire and power outages and the winds as well, and had to move. Yes.
That was around the 10 p.m. time frame after we had already ordered the full evacuation of town. Our service center, our City of Gatlinburg Service Center, began to experience fire. Fire was progressing out East Parkway, Highway 321, and now it's involved the Napa Auto Parts, and there was a Jeep Rentals, and we received notification from one of the on-scene commanders that said that the fire was progressing our way, that didn't seem like they were going to be able to stop it, and they suggested that we evacuate the Emergency Operations Center.
There was an after-action review, a rather extensive one that was done by the Interior Department, and it was basically about how the fire was handled. And Superintendent Cash, this would be directed to you. While the review found no wrongdoing by park crews, and I'm quoting the report here, they said, "We wanted to avoid should have, could have, and would have statements." The review, however, said, and I'm quoting again, "We found weaknesses in the park's response." What is the park doing now to strengthen those weaknesses?
Well, one of the things that we really wanted to be aggressive in moving the needle positive forward was our communication. And as you know, that's the backbone of any operation, whether it's the city or the park. So what we're doing now is we're working with Friends of the Smoky, which is our philanthropic group that raised money for different projects. And so we're embarking on a $2.5 million effort to replace all of our communications and all of our repeaters throughout the park that allows us not to only effectively communicate within the park, right, but now we'll have the capacity to speak to emergency responders that are outside the park boundary. And what we find from that is that we were communicating, but not as efficiently as we could have. And so with this new upgrade, it's going to allow us to do that.
We've heard from people who have asked us, and you've heard these questions before, and they were, why didn't the park fight the chimney tops 2 fire more aggressively, especially at the beginning?
Well, one of the things that we look at when based on where the point of origin is what's the safety to the firefighters? And so if you've ever, and I'm sure you've been to the chimney tops, it's a very, very steep, rocky area. And so based on that and not putting firefighters at great risk, we want to make sure that we can fight this incident safely and effectively. And so in wildland fire, there are 2 ways that you can do it. It can be directly or it can be an indirect attack. And so we chose the indirect attack because based on the best available information we had, that fire was backing down that ridge top, and that would have allowed us to more effectively get it, to be more aggressive toward it, but also do it in a safe and effective manner.
Were some lessons learned from the way it was fought?
Oh, absolutely. You know, again, we can't have a hindsight bias. Yep. Each fire is like a fingerprint. Each one are different, and based on the terrain, the wind, and the origin of it, we'll have to look at that. Every time we'll look at it differently.
All right, everyone. Unfortunately, we need to take a quick break. We're going to continue our discussion here, the Gatlinburg wildfires 1 year later, when we come back.
Welcome back to the WATE 6 on Your Side roundtable discussion, the Gatlinburg wildfires, lessons learned. We've
been talking about communications, and we're going to pick up with that conversation. We were talking specifically within the park system, but City Manager Cindy Ogle, I want to talk about communications possibly from the city's perspective on that day. There has been a lot of talk and a lot of criticism about social media updates, website updates, or lack thereof the day of, being this fire had been burning so closely for so long. And by that Monday, we had some very stark images of the amount of smoke within the city of Gatlinburg. Is there a reason why there were not updates put out on social media? Is that something that you've looked at here in the past year about possibly increasing or changing that?
Yes, we have looked at that, Kristen. Could I say something about the evacuations that you were just talking with the chief
Yes.
about? And he alluded to this, but I want it to be clear, and we have said this repeatedly, that there were evacuations occurring throughout the day. And I think that's extremely important in the context of this conversation about evacuations. So I just wanted to say that. As it relates to social media communications, yes, we are taking a harder look at that as to how we can improve that. The fact of the matter, though, is that communications, as you've already touched on with the fire chief and with Superintendent Cash, they were limited until late Monday morning. So as soon as we were able to begin to push that information out, we were doing that. We were doing that through, I know that you know Marcy Claude, who's sitting over here, our public relations person with the CVB. I know that Mayor Waters, PIO, PR person, Perrin Anderson, of course, got involved later that evening. So, you know, we were taking steps to get the information out as best and as accurately as we could.
There were flood sirens in town, but those are changing as well, correct?
Yes, we have, actually all of these sirens were damaged in the fires. And it was, prior to the fires, that was considered the city's flood warning system. We have since replaced all of the 4 that were damaged in a phase 1 project that I guess occurred back in the spring. We added 1 siren to that phase 1 project. We're in the process now of expanding further in the city, out into the county, with working with Mayor Waters and his folks in doing that. The park is actually participating as well, putting a siren, I think, up at Sugarlands, up at the headquarters area. So that project is hopefully going to be complete by the 1st of December.
I also understand there is an AM radio station that will soon be up and running that can help get information out. When do we expect to see that?
At the, I think, at the same time as the installation of the sirens is complete, I'll defer to the fire chief there.
That is correct. The phase 2 of the emergency notification system in its entirety will begin install around the first week of December is what we're being advised. And it's supposed to take a couple of weeks, but that will be 9 additional siren sites to be in the city, in the county, and the one in the park, as well as the AM radio station to broadcast messages.
Let me direct this to Mayor Werner. Some of the city commission meetings, as you know, have been rather heated. The critics have been very vocal in what they've said. UT Professor Henry Grissino, Mayor, has said that building back on the same footprint is like asking for a repeat of last year's disaster, according to the professor. He said that the cabins in some communities are like fire dominoes. Why not make people adhere to some of the revised standards that have been established?
If I could say, let me make this statement first. You know, we lost our home, lost our business, which so many people did, but nothing compares to the people who lost their lives and people who lost loved ones. I think that's the most important message that we can give this morning. As far as building back, you know, that is a city issue. We're trying to make it as easy for people to get their lives back, to build back with the least problems that, you know, they have to deal with. One thing that I personally have done is tried to be very positive in the recovery and let people know that everything is going to be okay. I think that's a very important message, and it's because of the people here. It's how resilient they are, how strong they are, how positive they are is why we're recovering so soon.
But how about the standards that have been established? We don't want the same thing to happen again, and some people are building as they had built before.
I'll address that to our city manager.
As it relates to the footprint, that is a fair statement. As it relates to building codes, there has been no waiver as it relates to building codes. So anyone rebuilding in the city of Gatlinburg, and I'll say this in the county as well, has to meet the updated building codes.
The updated?
Yes, the building codes that we would have adopted in 2012, I believe, is the year. So, you know, I think there's a bit of a misconception that because the city said you can build back in the same footprint, that meant you could build back whatever you did before, and that is not the case. You do have to meet updated building codes as you rebuild.
And they're a little bit tougher than they had been before.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. We need to take another quick break, everyone. Stay with us, though. We're going to continue our roundtable discussion when we come back.
Welcome back to the WATE 6 on Your Side roundtable discussion, the Gatlinburg Wildfires, Lessons Learned.
We're going to continue our discussion right now with a relatively heated moment, if you will, that happened right here inside the Anna Porter Library several days after those fires. And Mayor Waters, I'm going to go ahead and kind of address you on this one. You took control of all of the news conferences, but in particular one that you stopped in its tracks after a reporter from North Carolina began asking a series of questions and essentially was asking all of you who was responsible for the lives lost.
It was Monday that the evacuation was ordered. I have a question about who was overseeing the fires over the weekend. There are people that have lost loved ones. There are people that have lost their homes. Who was overseeing the fire over the weekend, and why was not an evacuation ordered earlier as a preventative measure when in North Carolina they took aggressive steps to evacuate people from multiple fires to avoid just what we're seeing here in Tennessee today?
I don't think, you know, what we're getting into is folks that don't know this area and got Monday morning quarterbacking, and we're not going to get into that right now because we did the best they have, and we're sorry for that, but we're not going to get into Monday morning quarterbacking right now. That'll be something when we have the evaluation that we'll certainly take a look at and ask these questions.
What was going through your mind when that happened?
The one thing that I thought at the time is that's not appropriate at this time. We were still searching. We were still trying to locate missing people. That was our priority. We had, you know, unfortunately, we discovered that we had some lives had been lost, and that has been was at that time and still is very distressing to all of us. So that's what we were focused on. We were focused on continuing to put out spot fires that were in the city and the county. So I just didn't think it was the appropriate time to address it. As I said, we're not going to do that today, but there will be a time when we will address what was done right and what we can improve on. And we are in the process of doing that. That report, we don't have an exact date of the release of that report, after action report, that the city of Gatlinburg and Sevier County is participating in, but it will be soon. And so that will address issues that I think are appropriate, that one, like the reporter, addressed at that day. I just didn't feel like it was the time. We had so much more going on that we had not had time to review the questions that she was asking or even discuss them. We were focused on search and rescue.
What are some of the issues that you think would be appropriate that you need to address?
Well, they're going to. Some of them have already been addressed. You've heard tonight. You've heard the chief and the city manager talk about the warning system that's been in place. The county is participating in that. The county commission has already appropriated the money. We anticipate that area in North Chalet Village and off of the spur to be a part of this initially. We've appropriated some $300,000 for that, but that's not where we're stopping, because we're going to go in each community in Sevier County and put one of these systems in each community. We're going to spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve our emergency response, and the IPAWS system that we had so much trouble with, now it's going to be able to be done in county. We will not have to. We've applied to FEMA, and I understand, Chief, if it's right, they have approved that we're now going to be able to do that in county. We will not have to call anybody to do that, so that's going to be a real positive. So we're taking more and more steps that we see already before the after-action review, and you know, our plan, the county's plan, is similar to plans in all 95 counties, but we're going to upgrade that plan, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that our citizens and our visitors feel as safe as possible.
Chief Miller, real quickly here, I want to address the National Park Service came out with their report, and one of the things that came out was the subject of the new norm. Fires like this would be the new norm. The city has come out and said, we don't think this is the new norm. What is your reaction to those statements that this is the new norm?
I think it's perception. A lot of people hear the word new norm, and they may perceive that to mean this is going to be routine. This is going to be something that happens every day or every year. I do not think that we're going to see what we saw on November 28, 2016 on a routine. But before November 28th, we could say that we had never experienced anything like that before. We do not have the luxury of saying that anymore. So we have to make sure that we are prepared for something, because we can't claim that we had never had it. So I think that might have been where they were leaning towards with that statement of, You need to be able to expect things in certain regions and certain geographies that we've never expected before.
Well, we'll be right back with more on our roundtable discussion right after this.
All right, welcome back everyone to WATE 6 on Your Side's roundtable discussion, the Gatlinburg Wildfires Lessons Learned.
And Chief Miller, just in the few minutes that we have left, in the future, under what conditions would the city be prepared to issue a mandatory evacuation order?
That's a great question. I think coming out of an event like this, you have no option then to lower the tipping point of when you would call for a full evacuation. But that's why we have gone through the steps of improving this emergency notification system and enhancing all of the different methods by which we can notify people. It's not just going to be sirens, and it's not just going to be AM radios with iPads and text message and phone calls and social media platforms that we can address now. We'll be able to get that message out quicker and not have to rely on door-to-door messaging. Never did anyone think that you would be in a situation to where 99% of your communication systems would become fractured.
Yeah.
And you lose internet and you lose cell phones and landlines and everything else. That forced us into an archaic method of evacuation, of going door to door in the most unprecedented conditions ever seen in this area. So we're definitely going to be better prepared for that in the future.
So we want to thank all of you for coming today and for sitting down and talking about, again, a situation that undoubtedly changed the lives of so many here in our community.
And thank you so much for your candid comments.
And if you would like to watch this again in its entirety, or as we continue our discussion, you can go to our website, wate.com. Right now, stay tuned for WATE 6 on Your Side, News at 6.